Spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. What's up, guys? Once again, here we want to do a spoiler discussion for chapter 407 of My Hero Academia, which is known as, I have no idea. I generally have no idea. I think it's like one for all and all for all, something like that. Something like that. But this chapter is, I remember hearing something about Hori wanting to do a horror manga? Something like that after MHA. I feel like bro's warming up. I feel like he's warming up, to put it lightly. Bro is, he's feeling a little bit devious. But there's a decent chunk to talk about from my very limited understanding of the rough translations I have for the chapter. So let's not waste any more time and let's hop right into it. What's up, guys? Alfonso here. Fun fact, I have it on me. I keep it on me at all times. I mean, another fun fact, yeah, I don't know. Like, I can definitely glaze Hori's art this chapter, as I always do. But it's unsettling. It's unsettling. I don't know. Something about it doesn't feel right. But I suppose that's the whole vibe of this chapter. Because, golly gee willikers, fellas. This is something else. So, we open up and we do get to see that All for One and One for All's original user, Yoichi, which is so weird to think about, because like now whenever I say Yoichi, I immediately think of Blue Lock's Yoichi, which is such a strange thing. But we actually get to meet their mama. Yeah, their mama, she lived on the streets. Let's just say that. And she had, how do I put this? Non-conventional funding. And Yoichi and All for One, they had a non-conventional father, if you will. AKA, we do not know, and we will never not actually know the father of All for One and One for All, which is another interesting parallel to Midoriya and All Might when you think about it. Because we don't know their dads. We didn't know All Might's parents or lineage at all for the longest time, but we did get a shot of his mother in one of the more recent chapters. And, like, I'm not even sure if Midoriya's dad has ever even gotten a mention in canon. Like, I'm not sure. Like, I meant to look that up for another video, but I think, like, Hizashi Midoriya consistently comes to my head as, like, a name for him, but I'm pretty sure that's just a fandom name. But you know what, let me double check right now, because I meant to look that up before. Hizashi. Actually, let me just look up what is Deku's father's name. Fan knows that his name is, oh no, so it is a real name. It is a real name. He's Hisashi. Hisashi. I'm not sure how to say his name. Midoriya, and he has a fire breathing quirk. Okay. So, all right. So we do know Midoriya's father's name, which is more than we can say for All for One and the original One for All holder's name. But I do think it's very poignant that we haven't met Deku's dad, we haven't met All Might's dad, and we are never, most likely, if we didn't get it in this flashback, we're most likely never going to meet One for All and All for One's dad. Very, very, very interesting. But once again, we see that both the unlimited and greatest evil and the most unparalleled and unbridled good can come from truly anywhere. And we notice that this woman, who is the mother of both the greatest power for good and the greatest power for evil in all of creation, has a little something on her arm. A little something that looks familiar. A little bit of a spike. Just a teeny tiny bit. Nothing too crazy, but just an itty bitty little spike. That's what she has popping out her arm. And we see that growing inside her are two children. All for One and Yoichi. And, jeez, like, Hori, dog, what in the world? I don't know, it's just, very the art in this chapter once again is just super duper unsettling. It's very purposeful though. Like obviously, this is not meant to be a pleasant backstory, but jeez, like it's like it's a train wreck in the sense that like I don't want to look at it, but I can't stop looking away because I can appreciate the artistic detail. It's hard to draw people, especially considering he went for like more realistic babies. Like these are not stylized to Hori's art style. Even the mom in general herself is stylized to Hori's art style loosely, but the babies clearly are not. So it's just like, ugh. However, we do get to see that we get a light backstory on quirks as a phenomena, and we actually learn that, technically speaking, the glowing baby wasn't actually the first quirk. This is, I don't want to call it, I mean, I guess it kind of is a retcon, because that's what we were told the first quirk ever was, but like, no. The glowing baby was the first one to ever have prominence. All for One and One for All's mama, she had a quirk. She had a quirk. It was that little spike that was growing out of her that she never noticed. All for One, he actually predates the glowing baby. We find that out. I always was wondering the timeline on that. I always thought he was like right after. Admittedly, just going with the idea that the glowing baby was the first one, I always figured he was like 0.2 seconds later, and he may have went and gotten the original first quirk. But no. He straight up predates the glowing baby, which is an interesting retcon. A very, well, not, I guess it technically is retroactive continuity, or it's like but would you call a revelation of truth more like a retcon? I have no idea what you would call it. But essentially, All for One predates the glowing baby. And that's interesting. Once again, quirks are related very akin to a disease, which goes all the way back. I feel like I keep mentioning Overhaul in a lot of the recent MHA discussions and MHA reviews, but remember what Overhaul was saying about quirks and how they were wrong, they were nasty, they were disgusting, they were a disease that came from rats. It just seems like that phenomena is getting more and more evidence through this backstory. And we see, once again, the mass outbreak of quirks and the fundamental restructuring of human DNA. Once again, I have not a clue what any of this actually says, but it is just going down the quirk phenomena and the evolution of humanity. And we do get to see that ultimately, while the mother of One for All and All for One ended up perishing, that didn't mean they did, obviously. And in this new chaotic world, right, where, you know, quirks were just starting to be realized and bored, and the chaos that would have come from a mass revelation that, oh, by the way, these abilities are akin to, like, the plague, in the sense that they're widespread, they're going to keep happening, and there's pretty much no cure for it. All for One, one of the originals of these abilities, ended up surviving and ended up staking his claim. And we see ever since he was young, he always coveted quirks, always coveted power. Even before the famous instance where he got the idea to become the Demon Lord, All for One was a being soaked in darkness. Because we see him in a cloak, he walks from the shadow, and he's a child still, but next to a whole group of adults. The adults notice him, and obviously they can tell by his less than conventional appearance, his big old bug eyes, his flat face, the cloak, like, something's wrong. He may be one of them. And them in this context is presumably referring to one of those undergoing the quirk phenomena, the super mutation, if you will. But as they turn their back to leave him be, because like, as a kid, whatever, it'd be like that when it'd be like that, especially when it'd be like that. It's not like we can help him. We see that the spike quirk that All for One's mama had is now directly in the hands of her child, as All for One tears through all of these people with this spike quirk. And once again, the imagery in this is just like, oof. I don't know what kind of dastardly timing Hori was on when he decided to draw this chapter, but he was going for it. And we see that ultimately, All for One is one of the rare cases, I think, so far. Well, we don't know much about Compress's like childhood. We just know he comes from a lineage of thieves. But unlike your Dabis, unlike your Togas, unlike your Shigarakis, all of those who were innately born with potential for the possibility for a hypothetical reality of good, or at least neutrality. They were not destined to walk down the path of villainy. It appears that All for One, from his birth, from even before his birth, from when he was inside his own mother, he was pretty much the embodiment of all evil. In minor ways, in major ways. But All for One was so greedy, so hungry, so needy for that dominance, that superiority, that the reason he is so much bigger as a baby than Yoichi is, than One for All was because he simply absorbed all the nutrients. He took them all because that was his right. He inherently believed that he held dominion over all creation. And once again, it goes back into the idea of nature versus nurture when it comes to quirks. Like, for someone like All for One, a person whose quirk specifically revolves around the taking of other quirks, did he ever have a choice? Was his personality what decided his quirk, or was it his quirk that decided his personality? Because if you're showing tendencies of possessiveness, of desire to take, of all that, if you're showing all that before you're born, and we even see after he spikes through all those people, it seems like All for One and One for All's mother did give birth, but not in a conventional hospital or anything like that, just due to likely a lack of funds and who knows what other reasonings at the time. But we see that the first quirk, once again, that he stole was his mother's quirk. And he very specifically uses it to try and drain all the nutrients out of her. And who knows, maybe she would have perished in just childbirth. That seems to be somewhat implied here. But as you see All for One gripping his brother and digging into his mother, it appears that in more ways than one, he viewed everything in the world as his. And by proxy, her life, irrelevant, just a source of nutrients. And it is, once again, the imagery in the chapter is just, crazy. Hori, it's weird to say Hori was in his bag, but like, he was low-key in his bag throughout this entire chapter. And you see this pattern ever continues. All for One was inhumanely powerful ever since he was a youth, notably based on the variance in power between his mother's manifestation of the spike quirk and his own manifestation of the spike quirk. I do genuinely wonder if All for One always had an innate power enhancing property, right? It was like, maybe you can argue the mother was never like physically strong or anything like that, and thusly she couldn't use it to the full potential. But remember, this is a child All for One. This isn't an All for One who's been like hunting down all types of quirks for multiple years. He's one of the first. Presumably, the glowing baby was like maybe a year or two after him. So the variety and quality of quirks would be much lower at the time, but inherently his abilities seem so much more powerful, to the point where even as a child, you see like he's impaled people through buildings. He has full-grown men on the ground. People are running and screaming in fear of him. Like, I wonder if he always sort of just had the ability to amp quirks. Maybe not to the same degree he did later in life, obviously, and probably nowhere near to the same degree that he is now that he's rewinding out of existence and his body's sort of like consistently hopped up off adrenaline. But it's interesting. It's very, very interesting to see the inherent awfulness of the character. And admittedly, I do think it's something I was always wondering if they were ever even going to address. I genuinely did wonder how Midoriya felt, or how we were going to tackle Midoriya feeling about his whole saving villains thing when it came to All for One, right? Because, like, okay, if we're gonna decide to try to save and redeem Shigaraki, a man who has conscientiously taken numerous lives and has admitted on numerous occasions that he conscientiously wants to take more upon more upon more upon more and destroy literally everything. And at any moment, he is quite literally a deity for all intents and purposes. While Midoriya may be the strongest in short burst, Shigaraki is the strongest creature in existence when it comes to longevity and raw power. I was wondering how we were going to tackle All for One. And notably, Hori Soft tackled that problem the moment he set up a time limit, right? Like, obviously, there's nothing Midoriya could do to save All for One from Eri, right? Like, her power has initiated. So thusly, if All for One were to just stand there or be restrained or anything like that, Midoriya wouldn't even have to get rid of him, because literally just the laws of nature would get rid of him due to the nature of Rewind. But I think even with that being set up, Hori is going backwards and pretty much soft establishing the idea that All for One was never one who could be saved. He's just born evil. And I'm fine with it. I'm fine with it. I was initially, when I first read it, I was like, I'm not sure how I feel about that. But in retrospect, when I think about it, I think it's fine. I think it's mainly just a thing for us as an audience versus something of like actual importance that'll be relevant to the story. Like, I don't think we're gonna get All for One, and maybe we get it when he goes inside the Vestige world to try and save Tomura from Shigaraki / All for One. Maybe that's when we're gonna get it. But even with that being the case, I do kind of, it goes back to the whole idea of, I wish Midoriya had to deal with the trolley problem. Like, I get it's not that kind of story, like the internal questions of nature versus nurture and what it has to do with All for One, and like how much of it is actually his fault for being born the way he was due to the nature of his quirk, and how quirks fundamentally affect people even in their early stages. Like, all that would be interesting enough to tackle, but once again, someone has to be the villain. Someone has to be the person that Tomura / Shigaraki needs to be saved from. Someone has to be that root of all evil. And why not the child that Midoriya would never know, never interact with, and is buried under such malice and negativity that if he were to ever try and reach the child that is All for One, he would just find himself consumed by an everlasting darkness. However, of course, sorry, I went on a whole tangent about All for One just being evil incarnate, which I'll probably talk about more when the proper chapter comes out, so I have more context for it. But we see, as All for One's going on a rampage, a can hits his arm, and once again, with those big old eyes, he's like, who do I need to tear apart limb from limb now? And we see that the person who threw the can, the person who's begging All for One to stop, is Yoichi, his little brother, because he sees that All for One's hurting people. And once again, if All for One was born a paragon of evil, this incarnation of negativity and malice, it appears that Yoichi was born this paragon of good, or at least to the point where he does care about other human beings well enough that he's like, hey, broski, maybe not harm them. But of course, considering this is All for One, a born crazy person, like a sociopath, he just kicks his little brother away. But notably, what the chapter goes on to highlight and reveal is that no matter how much he couldn't care less, realistically, about Yoichi, a quirkless boy, no matter how little he could care about the potential he could bring, because he has no potential, none of that, ultimately, he never actually throws Yoichi away. And he never intended to. And it does put an interesting twist on his desire of One for All, because in a way, well, the chapter itself implies it. Boy, let me see. Do I have it in my images? Yeah. So we see a few years, maybe not a few years later, maybe even in the same year, All for One is wreaking havoc still, but the quirk breakout, once again, it's more so akin to a disease now. We're 100% confirming that. the Quirk breakout is causing more and more chaos, and naturally the more quirks that appear, all that is more fuel for All for One. So it's this never-ending cycle of, oh, new quirk, that's me. You have a new quirk, that's me. But All for One returns to Yoichi, and he sees that Yoichi's actually trying to figure out how to read. And once again, we see the innate brotherly bond between the two when they both read Captain Hero together. Read, quote unquote. Comic books allow for the interpretation of the story without the ability to read, which is why I'm able to do any of my breakdowns, because I can't read a lick of what this manga is saying. But once again, the pictures and the rough translations are helping me out here. And we get context, right? I wanted to call it brotherly love. I wanted to call it brotherly care. But it's hinted at earlier in the chapter. We get a flashback to earlier in the chapter and presumably a text box explaining it. The reason Yoichi is so important to All for One, the reason Yoichi is allowed to be kept around, even though for all intents and purposes, he's like a waste of space, a waste of resources and all that, is because in a similar vein to how the Spike Quirk is the first quirk that All for One acquired, and thusly it likely holds some sort of sentimental value to him, as the first utilization of his abilities taken directly from his mother. Yoichi, in a twisted sense, is All for One's first possession. He doesn't actually see the value of Yoichi as a person. Not really. He sees him much more like a dog, a cat, or like literally just a cherished object. The first thing that All for One ever had, even when he was just born. You see, he has his grip tightly around his smaller brother's arm. And thusly, that possessiveness exists there, and it always has. And unfortunately, in an indirect way, though admittedly it seems like it was destined to happen regardless, Yoichi's love of these comics that would allow him to transcend his limitations of a lack of conventional education ultimately ended up inspiring the greatest evil to ever exist. As All for One decides that, why not? If everyone wants to be a hero, especially in reference to the glowing baby, someone who had rallied a bunch of people behind them based on their nature as a hero, a guiding light, if you will, then he shall be an everlasting wave of darkness, malice incarnate, all for one and one for all, if you will. And we see, as he ran towards this future, ran towards this path to becoming the greatest demon lord in history, he lost his first possession. Yoichi, in one way or another, was destroyed by All for One, destroyed by Kuno, destroyed by All for One's own actions. And all that is very, very interesting. So, I do have to say this chapter is quite worthy. So there's a lot of stuff in this chapter. Once again, this is just from the rough translations I got and like reading the pictures the best I can. I think I'm even missing some pictures. This chapter confirms a lot of stuff that was for the longest time theory. And I think that works. I do greatly appreciate Hori going back, getting into that horror bag, getting back into that uncanny valley bag, and really like flexing his chops and setting up some world building. Do I appreciate the retcon that All for One predates the glowing baby and the glowing baby was actually the first quirk? Actually, I do. Now that I've thought about it more, I think I do appreciate it more than I dislike it, because it makes sense. It makes sense, like a spike quirk go unnoticed. A bunch of little quirks would go unnoticed at first, but something as bright, something as obvious, something as clear-cut as a glowing baby, of course that'd be given the first thing. It's kind of like goes back to the whole like Thomas Edison versus Nikola Tesla, who really invented the light bulb. It was Tesla who had the idea. It was Edison who monetized the idea. So it's like, sure, All for One, and who knows how many other quirk users predate the glowing baby, but they just weren't the glowing baby. So thusly they didn't get the same recognition. So I do appreciate that. Once again, Hori's world building is one of the most realistic things, and I appreciate that. And of course, the relation back to Overhaul's philosophy of quirks being a plague, something that should be wiped out from existence as a blight of sorts. I mean, I'll take it. I'll take that soft confirmation, if not hardcore confirmation from this chapter. All for One being born evil, I'll hold that. I think it is a obvious enough development. All for One never seemed like the kind of guy that we were gonna find out had like a tragic backstory, and that's why he ended up the way he was. And so it makes more sense that he's kind of just evil, evil for the sake of being evil. And once again, I think it fits into the nature of his quirk, right? Like one of the biggest things about My Hero Academia is your quirk or lack thereof, or what kind of quirk you have. It fundamentally affects you in how you grow up and how you even exist. So a quirk that's all about possessiveness, all about taking, all for one, if you will, it makes sense that All for One himself would end up so directly and despicably evil when it came to that. And I like how All for One, from the beginning, was a monster, but a monster that couldn't control everything. And I think the lack of control is going to be his biggest downfall in the end. So a very, very W chapter indeed. However, that's what I think. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. But please, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, please leave baby for one in the comment section down below. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. If you like, share, comment, and subscribe, and make sure you hit that little notification bell so you do not miss out on any videos that come to the channel. Also, I do have a Patreon down below. You support for as low as $1 a month, getting the latest videos, early content, and more. You also now become a member of the channel for as low as $3 a month to get the same perks and more. Some of those perks will include the live reaction to this very chapter. Now, I want to thank you guys so much for watching once again, and hope you guys have a wonderful day. It's Dag on the Pencil, writing off. I'd like to give a thank you to our $3 members, O'Connor Plays and Red Wolf 4765. I'd like to give a thank you to our $5 patrons, Winter, Victor, Sean, Midnight Gemlord, Kevin, and Demix LND. I'd like to give another thank you to our $7 member, Autumn's Morning Lazo. I'd like to give another scrumdiddlyumptious thank you to our $10 patrons, Robbie Uchiha, Joaquin, and Idem Okami. I'd like to give another thank you to our $25 member, Alex Ice Rose. I'd like to give one final thank you to our $25 patrons, Igneo and Calvin Elder.